on this episode of Jeff Does Vegas.
Yeah, we put our heads together every day, but every week, and try to find, what are things that Las Vegas is talking about, like what's in the news, and what are some of the hidden gems, and what are the things that people think they know a lot about, but maybe don't. And so we've really been exploring as many different aspects. We really want to not just be a show about downtown or a show just about the Strip. I mean, we talk about gambling now and again. I can't get it out of my system, but it's not the thrust of it. We talk a lot about food and a lot about local politics and a lot about just life in our city, but not just one part or the other.
Las Vegas. It's more than just a city. It's a feeling. It's that feeling of excitement when you spot the lights of the Strip out the airplane window. It's that feeling of awe as you stroll down the boulevard, taking in the sights and sounds. And it's that feeling of satisfaction, knowing that you're in the greatest city in the world. Over 42 million people from around the world share that feeling every year. And I'm one of them. Taking you to the world-famous Vegas Strip and beyond, my name is Jeff. And this is Jeff Does Vegas. My guest for this episode of the podcast wears a lot of different hats. Dayvid Figler is a performer, musician, author, podcast host, and longtime trial lawyer with several notable clients and cases in his portfolio. Dayvid was kind enough to join me on the podcast for a chat where we discussed his experiences of growing up in the shadow of the Vegas Strip, literally, running away to college at the age of 16 and writing the bar exam at 23, his part in overturning a lap dance ban in Clark County, and what it's like hanging out with Flava Flav. Yes, that Flava Flav. We also talked about his role with CityCast Las Vegas, a daily podcast that shares all the news and information you could ever need or want to know about Las Vegas. Please enjoy my conversation with Dayvid Figler.
Well, I think we were fleeing Chicago because I guess now everyone's probably dead, so I could tell the story. But my dad was a gambler from an early age. He was a little bit older too when he had me. He was sort of living on the fringe in Chicago, sort of selling cars on the side. But one of the revenue streams for the young Figler family was that we lived in an apartment complex in Rogers Park in the north side of Chicago, and the front of the house was where we lived in the living room, like the whole family apparently. The back of the house was occupied by bookmakers who were running illegal bookmaking operation, and they apparently had a number of families who were operating as the fronts, literally, to deflect any attention from law enforcement. And then one day, as the Figler lore goes, there was a bust on the first floor, and I guess we were on the third floor. And my dad went to the bookmakers who were essentially paying our rent and giving them a stipend and said, "Oh, so are we going to shut down for a while?" And the bookmakers said, "No, business as usual. Those people are gone, and now we're going to do more business up here." And I guess that night, my dad went to the car lot where he was working and asked his boss if he could have a car to come to Las Vegas and just sort of bug out. And that's exactly what happened. And for years, my dad would not list our address in the phone book. Like, you actually had to pay an extra fee to not be listed in the phone book. And so Papa Figler was not look upable in the yellow pages. And that is the origin story. And of course, to Las Vegas, my uncle Izzy had already sort of established himself here. He also kind of a refugee from Chicago for nefarious reasons. And he was working, I think at that time, at Caesar's Palace as a big wheel operator, the guy who spun the wheel. He had a real gift of gab. Actually wound up in the movie Rain Man with a speaking part years later. But he kind of set us up, got my dad a job over at the Sahara Hotel as a dealer of a game called Pan, not familiar to most people, and it's not played anymore, but sort of a poker variant. Kind of a rummy poker mashup. And that was it. We were off to the races, literally here in Las Vegas in the early 70s.
And so, I mean, growing up in Las Vegas in the 70s as a kid, and you quite literally grew up in the shadows of the Vegas Strip and of the casinos. I can't even imagine what that experience was like.
Me either. I'm still reflecting on what sort of trauma that must have really ingrained and how I'm still dealing with it. But yeah, we lived right there. We shared a cinder block wall with the Riviera Hotel. So the Riviera was on one side, and they used to have tennis courts back there when it was the Riv, and those tennis courts lined up against that cinder block wall, and on the other side of the cinder block wall was an apartment complex where we lived, and then that allowed my dad to be in walking distance to the Sahara, which he did every day, and then on the other side of our apartment complex was the Landmark Hotel, so that big parking lot sort of was adjacent to where we were as well. So we were sort of right there, wedged between the Riv and the Landmark for until I was golly, like 13 years old.
And I mean, when I talk to people that talk about having grown up in Las Vegas and being a kid in Las Vegas, I mean, for them, it was just what they always kind of knew. So when they would talk to other people that grew up in other cities, those other people are always kind of baffled about the Vegas kids' experiences.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that was culture shock when I went off to college. I was still rather young, but I went. What had happened was because I was a little bit younger, and I really wanted to get out of Las Vegas. I never wanted to look back. I just, had come to the conclusion that Las Vegas was not only not for me as a kid, but that there was no future here for me. That was, I was pretty resolute about that. So I asked my parents if I could go away for school and not go into UNLV, and they drew a map around Las Vegas that was anywhere you could get in a 1 day drive. And they go, you have to pick a school that's within this sort of circle around Las Vegas. And I literally found the farthest point that they allowed, which was Tucson. And so I wound up going to school, University of Arizona. And yeah, giant culture shock. The kids there did not share the Las Vegas experience. When things closed at 10 o'clock at night, that was the first wake up. Things aren't as convenient in other places in the world as they happen to be here in Las Vegas.
Doing a little bit of reading into your background and such, I know from what I had read, you did spend a little bit of time as a kid essentially hanging out in the casinos because
Oh
you
yeah,
you
yeah.
kind of you could, so to speak.
Eh, you played a little cat and mouse game with security at the time. They didn't want rugrats around, but you figured it out pretty early, I think, especially us who were so close. I mean, I had, I went to schools that were nearby where we lived, but we were still bused over there, or, later I was able to walk to some, but most of the kids were a little bit further out. I mean, we were really ingrained, and my dad being both a casino worker and a hardcore gambler, and my mom kind of too, we did spend an inordinate amount of time in casinos. Um, my free time was split between riding my bicycle as far as my little legs could, pedal me, and just cruising over to Circus where I, sort of leave my bicycle at valet and go up and goof up on the mezzanine until it got dark, and then I would head on home. So yeah, we spent a lot of time at the Stardust, at the Thunderbird, became the Silverbird, at the Sahara, at the Riviera, at Circus, that whole area north of Strip. That was my playground.
The idea of a kid rolling up to valet at Circus on their bike, just the visual image of that just cracks me up.
Yeah, and very normal for me. So I appreciate that, Jeff, because you're a normal human being. But for me, that was my normalcy. And yeah, I mean, it makes for fun cocktail talk and an interesting past, but that was out of control. There was no reason that I should have been immersed in that, especially unsupervised at that age. But yeah, Silver City was another one that we spent a lot of time at. Oftentimes it was wherever my dad was gambling, so we could get comps, because when the gambling didn't work out, the food supplements came from by way of coffee shops. So lots of shrimp cocktail, lots of prime rib growing up.
And that time too, like that was, as you say, that was the 1970s. That was
Mm-hmm.
still pretty heavy duty mob era for Vegas, particularly for that end of the strip when you had Riviera, Stardust, that whole area. That there
Yeah.
was a fair bit going on at that time.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, my dad was very tangentially uh, adjacent to that, right? So I mean, he knew people in Chicago. Obviously, he had we lived in an apartment run by bookmakers, so yeah, he knew people out here from Chicago who may or may not been affiliated on some degree. I mean, my dad wasn't. My uncle may have been. We're not. No one's really sure about Uncle Izzy, but yeah, he would know those guys. My dad was a good storyteller. He was a crack up. He was a funny guy. And so, he would chat with everybody, whether it be what we used to call porters or busboys or pit bosses or maybe these maid guys. I mean, my dad was the same with everybody. So, yeah, we saw stuff in the papers and things like that, people skimming or people getting shot or whatever. My dad would know somebody who knew somebody, blah blah blah. But it didn't really impact us in any major way. I don't think we ever per se asked for a favor or you know ran afoul of anything. We just kind of were living our lives, and that was sort of floating around to whatever extent it was on its way to die eventually, which it did, ish.
So ish.
Well, who really knows? Who really knows? There's so many controversies about who's connected to who, where money goes. I mean, there's a scandal of brewing at Resorts World right now, and nobody really knows for sure who's still, if you would allow the word, Jeff, connected to who.
So you go to college at 16, which seems
was stupid. It's dumb. In retrospect,
I mean,
every decision I've ever made was, in retrospect, not the best, but we persevered, did we not?
So was it just at 16 you were like, I need out. That's it. I'm done.
It's basically F this town. Like, it's never done anything for me. It was very, very kid hostile in a lot of ways. It seemed like, once we were coming of age, that especially the sheriff's office was very into cracking down on the kids having any degree of fun. I wound up, I guess, as a clique, although I was more tolerated than having the bona fides to be in it, but hung out with just this wild crew of brainiacs who were really out there. Like, they did shit that to this day they won't admit to, but it was, they were into a little bit of mayhem and destruction, as brainiacs can be, especially when you're bored, especially when there's nothing to do in town. And that was my time of, in many ways, of boredom. I found a lot of refuge, like just being in the library and reading books about places that were so much better than Las Vegas from my mind. And someday New York City, I'm coming for you, baby. But yeah, I really didn't want to be in Las Vegas. We used to call UNLV back in the day 13th grade. Nobody really wanted to go there. Although, they've obviously grown in stature and reputation, and it's a fine institution. But at the time, getting out was always a goal of my peer set. And yeah, because it was always an adult oriented place, at least back then. And there was not a lot to look forward to when you turn 21, unless, like some of my friends really wanted to be valet parkers, because apparently that was big time money. That was it. That was the dream for a lot of kids. If you weren't like, if your dad wasn't a lawyer or your dad wasn't a doctor, I would imagine the kids who had an easier life in Las Vegas maybe found it to be a little more appealing than us on the lower end of the economic spectrum, who were like, anything but this place. Come on. But I came back, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when you're 16, when you're that age too, I mean, you're beyond the age of riding your bike to Circus and valet parking it, but you're also not really old enough to, as you say, partake in any of the grown-up fun legally within the city either at that age.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were always being gunned for. And while it's kind of cute, little kid kind of running around a casino, it's a lot less cute when you're 16.
Right. So why law then? What was the interest in going into a law career?
I wish I had a lofty answer, Jeff. It's basically a default. My dad never went to college, and he was very well read, though. I mean, he just was a voracious reader. He read probably 3 or 4 books a week. I mean, this man was always reading when he wasn't gambling, or trying to be engaged with his family. But he always fancied himself to be a bit of a lawyer, and one of the things that brought him and my mom together, she had a court case back in Chicago that was like basically uh, a car crash, and both sides were blaming each other for it. My mom was actually messed up pretty bad. She went face first through the windshield, and was really devastating to her. Uh, but there was I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. The bottom line is that eventually my mom ran out of lawyer money, and my dad actually pro se took her case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, just as a layman.
Wow.
He didn't make it further. He actually got a conference with Thurgood Marshall's clerk, which was always his point of pride in his amateur lawyer phase. He always kind of aspired for me to do that, and I kind of had a bit of an aptitude, I think, for not doing hard science, and so law seemed pretty easy. I like talking obvious, and back in the day, that really was all that it would take to motivate somebody to go to law school, is that, well, I'm a good talker, I could argue with people. Turned out to be a little bit more than that, but yeah, wound up after Arizona, wound up going up to Sacramento, fell into a law program, and you know, kind of the rest has been character defining in 30 years of practice.
And was criminal law your first
Oh no. Oh
goal?
God.
No.
No. Again, a horrible decision in retrospect. Absolutely, for all the reasons. The soul-sucking nature of it, the pressure, people only coming to you at the lowest point in their lives, or with death and devastation or bounding. I really should have thought about puppy and rainbow law, or maybe just boring corporate law or something. But it was a lot. It's a fun story how I got involved in criminal law. I was just floating. I didn't have a particular interest. I actually, at law school, I was trying to gear myself to be an entertainment lawyer. But at that time, there wasn't a lot of entertainment law coming out of Las Vegas. It was all LA. And I didn't really intend to come back to Las Vegas when I graduated law school. So I was like really hustling for a entertainment job in LA. But if you think juice is the thing in Las Vegas, try to get involved in the entertainment industry in LA as a lawyer. So that wasn't really opening up for me. And I wound up coming back home just to take the bar, just to have it, just to make my parents happy. And my family was getting up in age, and I thought it was kind of the right thing to do, is sort of come back. And I wound up passing the bar, and then just so exhausted from that experience, I'm like, I'm not going to take another bar. I'll give Vegas a shot for a couple of years, see how that goes. And I just floated around. I mean, nobody wanted to hire a 23-year-old lawyer. So I did insurance defense. I did some labor law. I was like, wherever people would hire me, I would go. And then I was working for actually a prominent labor lawyer in town who represented unions. We represented like IATSE trust funds, and the electricians. And one of our clients was the the United Steelworkers of America, USWA, and they were on strike. They were titanium workers out in Henderson. It was the big Timet plant that's been out there for a really long time, and they were on strike, and so we were representing them during the strike. And then my boss was out of town, and the call came in from the union president, and there had been a lot of these are old hardcore Henderson steelworkers who are on strike. It was not pretty, especially since they were using scab labor, and it got a little tense out there on the picket line. And whatever, sometimes cars get blowed up. It happens. I mean, it happens,
It
right?
happens. Yeah,
it
sure.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got a call from the union president, and he was like, the FBI's here. What do we do? Knocking on the door. And I had no idea. I'm junior associate. I was just kind of working with my boss, and my boss was out of the country, actually. So I did the only thing that I could do, is like figure out who's a criminal lawyer in Las Vegas. Like, that was absolutely not my world nor my interest. And there were two really, really prominent criminal lawyers in Las Vegas at that time. One was Oscar Goodman, who I did not call, and the other is a guy named Dominic Gentile, who I did call. And I knew of Dominic Gentile because he has a very famous First Amendment case that we learn about in law school, where he was representing some guy, and the police and the DA were just crapping all over this guy, just destroying his character. And he decided, oh, I'm going to push back. And then he got dinged by the state bar because you're not supposed to talk about your cases. And he goes, wait a second, they could talk about the case and I can't. I'm taking this all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which he did and won. And he was in the title. It was, this Gentile v. the State Bar of Nevada. I'm like, oh, that guy seems like he knows what he's doing. And he did. I called him up. He's like, I got this. Don't worry. I'll meet you out there. And so, hauled out in my, I think I still had the 1978 Datsun 200 SX. Barely made it out to Henderson. I met Dominic, and he handled it. He wound up taking over that case. There was a criminal case that ensued, and it all kind of got resolved. And at the end of it all, he offered me a job. He said, "You interested in doing First Amendment law?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds great to me." And I didn't know at the time that First Amendment law in Las Vegas really meant that you represent a lot of strip clubs and escort agencies. But I was ready. Put me in, coach. And so wound up there. But he also had a really vibrant criminal practice, and I learned a lot from him. And he was one of my first mentors. And the rest has been criminal law history.
Representing strip clubs and escort agencies. Perks
We
of the
did.
job.
We did. We represent a lot of them. It was, and it's all about that beautiful big First Amendment, Jeff. It's very wide, and it covers lap dancing in Clark County, by the way.
Which is one of the cases that I did actually want to talk to you about. It was listed on your little bio that you sent me as one of your more notable cases was overturning a lap dance ban in Clark County.
You're welcome, Las Vegas. You're welcome, conventioneers.
But what was the background on that? I mean, that seems that's such a. I mean, let's dive into strip clubs for a second here. That is a big part of a strip club. I'm uncomfortable with where my hands are when I'm saying this. That's
above board, sir. Above board.
Above board. That's a big part of the strip club is the lap dance. So, I mean, in a city like Las Vegas and Clark County, how are they banning strip clubs? Or banning lap dances? I'm confused.
Well, Jeff, I've listened to your podcast. I know you know of the various dichotomies and contradictions that exist within our fair city. So this is yet another one of those. Sex sells, but you can't sell sex, right? I think a lot of people said that, but no one better than the great Las Vegas columnist John L. Smith. He would often point out these various hypocrisies. So, yeah, we have legal prostitution in the form of brothels just about an hour away in Nye County, Pahrump, but not allowed here in Las Vegas. And, elected officials come from, various backgrounds and look at their voter base and, sort of a puritanical or moralistic approach has never lost anyone votes anywhere. Even in a place like Las Vegas, although, it doesn't always resonate maybe as much as the folks in charge think it is. And at the time, I think Metro was really going after some of the strip club owners, thinking that some of them had some disreputable ties again. They were feeling that they needed to have a little bit of a pushback. They were going after some of our clients. And then the county just decided to pass a ban of any sort of touching in Las Vegas strip clubs. They were following suit that some other places had instituted to try to limit the spread of adult entertainment within the city. And I think part of that also had to do with like this common notion that certain things, if they do exist here, despite it being Las Vegas, will deter corporations from relocating their serious businesses here. So I never have bought into that, but that often I think was an impetus for a lot of weird laws, including this, touching ban. And so this was Dominic's case. I was me and another young associate. We were both just only a couple years out of law school. Worked on the case with him, which was totally fun. I got to prep a lot of the witnesses, which was just, so this is the genius of Dominic Gentile and this whole litigation was that the ban came down and he had to decide on the strategy on how to challenge it. So we wound up going to our our clients club and interviewing a lot of the dancers to find out, anyone here have an advanced degree per se? Anyone here, have some professional experience outside of this, whatever. So we found people, people who had graduate degrees and all this sort of stuff, who were working as dancers to put themselves through, and they're very, put together well, articulate, amazing witnesses. And then he found a dance expert from, I think she was from Connecticut. She was probably in her 80s. The silver-haired little lady who was talking about the nature of dance and religion and how it's always been a part of communication and society. And I mean, she had it. She was going. We drew a Mormon judge, and you would think that he would just kind of blow it off, but he was I don't want to say enamored. I think that's giving it a little too much, but he was captivated by especially the expert testimony, just breaking down how it's not a lap dance. It's an exchange of culture and information that goes back millennium, and at the end of that litigation, Dominic gave the best closing argument I've ever heard on a hearing, and boom, that ordinance got thrown out. Small side note to that whole thing. Well, actually, there's two really fun small side notes. One was it was the last case that was presented by the county's attorney, a gentleman named Michael Douglas, who became the first African-American Supreme Court justice in Nevada, and has had a storied career as a district court judge and then a Supreme Court judge. He was working on the Cannabis Control Board, has great ties, and have founded some amazing programs over at UNLV. But it was his last case, and I don't know if the bitter taste of losing that lap dance ordinance ever lingered. We, on occasion, would sort of like very gently tease about it, as we became colleagues in the future. But really good guy, but real crappy to be his last case before he became a judge. Anyway, the other side note is that we had a very interesting celebration afterwards. That's all I'm going to say about that.
I love that. I love that this dance expert called it a celebration of communication and culture.
Oh, it was amazing. It was really amazing.
That's what I'm going to call it the next time I'm getting a pile of singles before I'm going on my 100. Next Vegas trip. And talking to my wife, no, honey, I'm not going to a strip club.
I've got this long academic paper I need to share with you, babe.
Exactly.
I'm part of a rich culture. This isn't about anything else.
It's a celebration of culture and communications. Now, can I please have $101 bills, please? That's
No, it was a really fun case as a young lawyer to even be a small part of. And so that was, it's always fun to win too, especially something as stupid as that. I mean, that was really overreaching by the county.
So going back to your first ever criminal case, you didn't call Oscar Goodman that time, but
Correct.
You do and did have a connection with Oscar Goodman.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't live in Las Vegas and not be aware of the force of nature that is the Big O, Oscar Goodman. The mob doesn't exist, mob lawyer and longtime mayor and frequent personality, larger than life itself. I was working for I had gotten a job eventually for what was called the Special Public Defender. And we were like a conflict public defender's office. So if the regular public defender, the Clark County public defender, had multiple defendants or had a prior existing relationship with maybe the victim or some of the witnesses or whatever, they would need conflict-free counsel to come in and represent them. And that created our office, Special Public Defender. It was founded by a person who also became a Supreme Court justice named Michael Cherry, another one of my dear mentors. And we started out kind of a ragtag group of, I think, 6 or 7 lawyers who were doing just all these murder cases. And Michael had got elected to the bench, and his number 2, who was another mentor of mine, a guy named Mark Bayless, had left for private practice. And I didn't really have a relationship with the guy who wound up taking over, and I had a really complicated murder case. And we had like 10 murder cases at a time. It was really, there's a lot of murder in Las Vegas in the mid 90s, mid to late 90s. There were well over 100 murders a year that were taking place in Clark County. and a lot of them were death penalty. People don't realize that not only does Nevada have the death penalty, but Clark County specifically is one of the top 5 death penalty seeking and even getting counties in the country. We're considered an outlier because of how often they seek the death penalty. And at times we had the highest population of death row inmates per capita in the country. It's
Wow.
kind of gotten a little better, but not much. I mean, Clark County is still up there in the death penalty. So that was my job for like 6-7 years. And I had a case that had tangentially some organized crime ties, and I don't really need to get into the details of it, but I was a little stymied. I wasn't sure exactly how to handle it. You know, I didn't really have a relationship with my new boss. I cold called Oscar and I just said, "Hey, do you got like a minute for, I don't know, a young attorney seeking a little bit of advice on a case that you might have some insight?" He was very gracious, invited me over. We, you know, because I'm as good a talker as I like to think I am. I'm not a bad listener, especially when you get, a guy who's got every story in the world. And so I listen to his stories, which I've since, and I told him this the other night when I saw him, I've heard 100 times, but that first day, that was the first time, right? So we wound up going to lunch together that day, and we went over to this place called Max C's, Max, and then his last name was C, and it was a um, notorious little hole in the wall near the courthouse, near Oscar's office. And Max C was a real character. He used to have a giant sign as big as the wall itself, where he would just grill up sandwiches and stuff like that. And it just said, "In my opinion, Pepsi stinks." That was it. I mean, that's all you saw on that wall. And then on the other wall were sandwiches named after all the prominent defense lawyers in town, including Oscar. And so apparently Max C had a beef with Pepsi, and then eventually Pepsi made amends, and he changed a sign that said, "In my opinion, Coca-Cola stinks." And I was like, this is the best. I love Max C. So Max C had great greasy sandwiches, and all the characters showed up. And then I walked in with Oscar, and Oscar said, "We can't sit here." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, this one of my clients is here. I have another client that's over there. They're not supposed to be in the same room. If I'm in the room with both of them, we're all going to get arrested." And we had to leave and go somewhere else for lunch. That's a true story. So, yeah. So that was the beginning of my my journey with former mayor and possible mob lawyer, because he always denies the existence of an actual mob, Oscar Goodman, who played himself in the movie Casino.
I just recently had a conversation with John Katz-Lamettes about the season 3 of Mobbed Up.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. That looks like it's
with
gonna
the
be
Oscar Goodman thing. And the big thing that he said when he was having conversations with Oscar was talking about the mob and his connections with Tony Spilatro and Frank Rosenthal and that whole thing, was that Oscar's whole thing when it came to practicing law was he didn't care if the person was guilty or innocent. He just wanted to make sure that they were being prosecuted correctly and fairly by the government. That was always his thing. I know when we talked about the whole Tony Spilatro thing and saying, well, Tony Spilatro is such a bad guy, why didn't he spend any time in prison? It's a fair point, Mr. Goodman.
Well, I would add a footnote, and as long as Oscar got paid. Let's be real.
Yes. I mean, he wasn't doing it for free. Let's face it.
No.
No,
I mean, that was always Oscar's line. It's like, everyone hates the defense lawyer. Everyone hates the defense lawyer until the constable comes for you or your family member, And I get it. Look, I've got thoughts about the criminal justice system that have evolved over the years. I used to be a part of it to such an extent, and always, fight or be disappointed or frustrated with the way things work. And then I just realized we're all just pawns in this stupid game of vengeance, and we don't know our actual roles. It's almost like the better we are as defense attorneys, the more we give credence to a system that's irreparably broken. And I think Oscar probably was the epitome of that. And a lot of those prosecutions were overreach. We see this. Look, and I'm no fan of the current targets of certain RICO prosecutions in the country right now. But it's always been susceptible to prosecutorial abuse, and reining in prosecutors and really I always say if we gave half as much attention to the Fourth Amendment as we apparently do to the Second Amendment, the country would be a lot better place, and we might not have all that mass incarceration that doesn't always get justified, I would say. Anyway, another soapbox for another day, Jeff. We're talking about Las Vegas, man. But yeah, no, Oscar, bigger life, and he was not just gracious to me, but to lots and lots of young lawyers, and I will always be grateful of that.
I want to talk about some of the notable clients that you've had, because you have represented some, I don't want to say funny people, but
Funny.
random. Let's talk about Flava Flav for a second.
Yes.
I saw that on your website,
Flava
and I thought, this is the most random thing that like. How, where, when, why, all of the questions.
Actually, it's a really mundane origin story for my part in the representation of Flava Flav. I was working with a longtime colleague through her firm, a really great attorney named Christina Wildeveld here in town. Another longtime raised in Las Vegas person with a really interesting past, interesting dad, whole thing. But she's carved out just a great career, and we wound up. Flav got and he had moved to Las Vegas, and he had picked up a felony charge for a confrontation he had with his stepson, adult stepson, in their home. And they were pretty serious charges. And the attorney that he had was a friendly of our firm's, who didn't really do that level of felony work on a regular, and so just kind of referred him over. We were actually close by proximity, but we also all know each other for a really super long time. And so Flav came over, and Christina and I took on his representation. That got worked out favorably for Flav. No felony Flav. That's what we're calling him. And so that led to, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years of representation with all the various Flav shenanigery. Flav loves fireworks. That's all I'm going to say. He really, really loves fireworks. In fact, actually, that was the bonding. I introduced him to Jonathan Jossel, and Jonathan is a giant fireworks head. I mean, if you've been around New Year's Eve in downtown Las Vegas, you know the plaza always goes for it. And I think Jonathan just loves that fireworks so much. And Flav used to go. I don't want to give too many attorney-client secrets away, meaning none.
Right.
But Flav, what is public record is that Flav used to host these monster parties in his homeowner association home every 4th of July with fireworks that he was accused of procuring from the places where they would not be legal in Clark County, if that makes sense. He got the loud poppy fly in the sky stuff. So most of his neighbors were cool with it because it was just this giant Flav party. I mean, just essentially a truck full of what some might consider to be illegal fireworks in the middle of the desert blowing up. But so, we went through that stuff and some other stuff. I mean, it's all public record. You could Google it, but, we bonded. My partner, Christina, she got to travel with him a little bit for some things. I got to travel with him for some things. I actually got to go to the Jimmy Kimmel show. It was being broadcast out of Brooklyn. They were doing a special bunch of shows. So Flav flew to Brooklyn, and he was going to do a Public Enemy show on Jimmy Kimmel. And so I kind of went with them, and I got to meet Howard Stern, who was also a guest on that show. And Flav's like, Howard, this is my lawyer, Dayvid. And Howard basically said, see, Flav, I've been telling you for years, travel with the lawyer. That's the way you do it. And then he introduced me to Chuck D, who had no interest in talking to one of Flav's lawyers because that's a whole nother world. And then as I'm backstage, I don't know if you know, so, Jimmy Kimmel's a Vegas kid, and Jimmy Kimmel's band leader is also a Vegas kid named Cleto Escobedo. And Cleto Escobedo and I went to elementary school together, and we were in Cub Scouts for years together. So I'm walking through the back halls of the Jimmy Kimmel show, and I bump into Cleto, and I of course know who he is because he's well known. He's extraordinarily talented musician, and we just kind of stop, and he's looking at me, and he goes, "I know you," and I go, "Yeah, you do," and he goes, "From before or after?" And I said, "Way before." And he goes, "You're Dayvid Figler." And I go, yeah. And he goes, so we just caught up a little bit, and it was kind of nice. And then he left. Not 2 minutes later, an elderly gentleman who kind of looked like a very much older version of Cleto Escobedo, it was his father, Cleto Escobedo Sr., comes barreling down the hallway and gives me the biggest hug and asks me how my mom was. So Cleto's dad was a well-known lounge musician in Las Vegas, and he worked at the Sahara. And my dad worked at the Sahara, and both he and my mom were on the PTA and all that stuff. So we used to go pick up my dad because my dad worked swing, so it'd be a late night, and we would go check out Cleto's dad over at the lounge. I mean, this was grown up Vegas kid, right? Just to kind of full circle that. And so he was like, how's your mom? You know, da da da. It was just very old school. And here I am, you know, in Brooklyn with Flav to bring that little reunion together. So that was really fun. But I'll tell you, walking around with Flav is always, he's a very gracious person to his fans. Never doesn't stop for the photo. Everyone's yelling his name. And we were walking through Brooklyn. People were screaming from rooftops, literally. Such an experience. Very interesting client.
I have heard that about him actually, and people that I know who have encountered him in Las Vegas have said, yeah, he's super friendly and really approachable and will take pictures and
super
sign
smart guy,
stuff and
very talented
yeah.
musician. People don't realize. Scratch bowler. I mean, Flav's the man.
A scratch. Have you bowled with Flava Flav?
I have been present when he bowled, and while I like to say that I was on the award-winning Fremont Junior High School ninth grade bowling team, I do not hold a candle to Mr. Drayton. He is an extraordinary bowler.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no,
You
the more you know. If you take nothing else away from Jeff Does Vegas, it's that Flavor Flav's a great bowler.
Something that you were involved with that I thought was really, really interesting was responsible gaming and criminal justice. I think this is a really, really important thing and very, very cool that you were part of this. You were involved with the establishment of the Problem Gambling Treatment Diversion Court, which for those that may not be familiar, such as myself, I have an idea of what I think it is, but can you explain exactly what that is?
Yeah, I mean, you know, whatever highs and lows, failures and successes I've had as a lawyer over 30 years, the one thing that I am head and shoulders the most proud of is my role in shepherding the gambling treatment diversion court for Clark County. It's an interesting story. It actually kind of circles back to not Oscar Goodman, but his son Ross Goodman. There was a law that got passed in 2010. It was controversial to an extent, but also not. The discussion around social responsibility, or what the casinos are doing to prevent the exploitation of people with problem gambling disorders, was kind of rising, I think, a little bit in volume, as far as like, are the casinos doing enough? Are we protecting them? Especially as like gambling was really spreading into local gambling in a major way through the 90s into the early aughts, and so a lot of people were getting caught up, especially a lot of, believe it or not, women over the age of 50 were getting caught up in gambling to the point where they were stealing money from their family. A lot of women who were working as bookkeepers for small mom and pop organizations were embezzling tens, 20s, hundreds of thousands of dollars to essentially feed the disease of problem gambling addiction. And a lot of them were going to prison because, you steal $500,000, you're going to go to prison for 10 years. And, they would have no crimes before that. This was it, and so Nevada, in grappling with this, and there were a bunch of lawsuits, and none of them ever go anywhere. But you probably know about this because every now and again it comes up where some big whale decides to sue the casino, saying, "You lured me here. You plied me with drinks. You sent me all the promotions. I was trying to leave, and then you said, well, how about 10,000 free cash?" And so I turned around, and then that turned into 10 million. And a lot of that was happening. And it wasn't making the casinos look particularly good. They were winning all of them, but it was just like maybe there needs to be something more that we're doing here. And so the idea came up that, like what people are probably familiar with, drug diversions, where you don't want to necessarily punish people because of disease that they're suffering from, was this idea of a gambling diversion, so that if you met certain qualifications, if your crime didn't involve any sort of violence or children, if it was really your first time or near your first time of being committing an offense, um, if you've never been through a program that was designed to help people with problem gambling before, all these like hoops that you'd have to jump through, that if the judge felt that there was a significant connection between the crime and it being either in furtherance of or as a result of your problem gambling disorder, that the court should treat you a little differently, offer you treatment, offer you a program, and if you're successful with that, and part of that would be, making best efforts to pay back the money that you stole, that you get a break at the end. You wouldn't have to go to prison. You wouldn't even have a criminal conviction. And so this law got passed in 2010. I won't bore you with the evolution of it, but it never got used. It really never got used. It never got used correctly. There was one lawyer who got in trouble for stealing client funds, and they sort of did a bootleg version of it. But at the end of the day, no one was benefiting from this. And it was funny because the opponents of it said, well, this is going to open up the floodgates. Everyone's going to say that they stole all that money because they got a gambling problem. Everyone's got a gambling problem in Vegas. They're just thieves who love to gamble, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it did. Like, it was zero. It was zero. No floodgate. The floodgate means more than one. And here we are at zero. So Ross Goodman, who I was working with in some degree, got a call from prison. It was a woman who fit that model that we just talked about. She was doing 4 to 10 years for stealing $500,000 from a company that she was the bookkeeper for. I mean, just central casting. And she said, the girls here in the prison are saying there's some sort of law for gamblers. Do y'all know anything about that? And Ross and I just kind of sat down and we looked it up, and we're like, oh, hell yeah, that law is right there. How come no one applied that? Long story short, too late. Ross wound up bouncing out of the case after a little while. He was there for most of the beginning part. And then we took it to the end and not only got her out of prison, but inspired a discussion which ultimately resulted in this physical court where a judge presides and people who qualify are allowed to get treatment instead of prison. And what's interesting is that the casinos uniformly supported it at the legislature. They all testified, yeah, that's actually a good thing. We don't need to punish people who are sick. We'll take their money. We're not going to give it back to the victims. But
no, God, no.
God, no. But we don't need them to rot in jail or prison, right?
Yeah.
And so that's happened now, and there've been, not floodgates, but enough people. I've had probably, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 clients who've gone through it, graduated, are contributing to society, doing right, spreading not only the word of recovery, but actually putting their whole person where their mouth is, and working towards the cause. A couple of my clients are now working in that nonprofit space for the treatment of problem gamblers. So it is a legacy that I'm very proud of having any bit of. I had the first legitimate case, and the second and the third, and I had the first client in the gambling diversion court, and it is really a good program. It's a model now that other states, now that gambling is all over the United States, in almost all the states now, I think all but 2. They come here and look and see how we do it, because it really is the other side of things. And to me, it's the least we can do when we're talking about this whole scenario of folks who are sick, who are losing all their money and their families and everything else. But it's definitely an intriguing concept, and I probably talked too long about it, but I could probably talk for another 2 hours about it, because it's something important. And I'm super, super glad that of all the places that had the first statutory permanent gambling diversion court, it was Las Vegas.
Well, and it would make sense to me that that it would be Las Vegas that would be the first place that would have that, and it would be Nevada that would be the first place to have that, based on the level of gambling and what's involved there. And I was going to say, I would imagine that with the proliferation of, particularly now, sports betting, which has really started to pick up elsewhere all over the US, that other states would start coming in and looking at this and saying, yeah, this is something that we should look at, because I would imagine Nevada and Las Vegas is not the only city and state having this issue.
Yeah, where people just kind of desperate. And the one thing that all my clients pretty much have in common is that despite the fact that they're all stealing, which is really the main offense, they're all in their minds like, I'll pay it back as soon as I hit. That hit is coming in their minds. That's their disordered executive functioning, right? And that's the allure of it all, is that they're just one hit away. And they're not wrong, except that hit's never going to happen. And even if it does, they're so far gone, they're going to put most of it back before they could replenish the money they stole. So, I mean, they're not really maliciously trying to hurt the people they're stealing from. They're just sick. They're just disordered in their minds because of all the things that gambling has done to them, and the way that they're, we could get into the hyper technical stuff of, but it is there. And it is, you would think Nevada, of course, would be at the forefront, but look, Nevada's only kind of in the middle of the country in how much money we spend per capita on treatment and prevention of problem gambling. And the big conversation never gets had, Jeff, which is, how much money do the casinos actually make off of people who cannot stop themselves? And I think you and I both probably know people who can't stop themselves, and we just kind of stand by and hope that it doesn't get too bad for them. But maybe there's a better way. At least this discussion through the criminal courts has made it a little more public. So at least there's that. And for the individuals involved, it certainly is it's a lot better alternative than just literally rotting in the hellhole that is prison.
I want to talk about your involvement in the arts, because you've got a lot of interest and involvement in the arts. You write poetry, you perform poetry.
It's not good poetry. It's not good poetry, Jeff. I mean, I appreciate that. I fess up to it, but let's just be right from the get-go. It's not good.
Does it rhyme?
Sometime. Like that? See what I did there?
See what you did. It was very well, very clever. And music as well is something that you're also quite involved with. Where does that whole interest in the arts and music and poetry stem from? Is that just something as a kid you did a lot of reading, you got interested in, or where did that all sort of stem from?
So that's kind of interesting. I've always thought that's where I was going to go, man. This law thing became like this 30-year distraction. Even in law school, I was writing a parody newspaper to the official law school journal where we would just sort of mock it. I've always had really a fascination with comedy. Might not be coming through because as I get older, I become less funny, more dad jokey. But back in the day, back at University of Arizona, I used to be in a comedy troupe, and we used to write our own sketches. Actually, my roommate at U of A became head writer for Saturday Night Live, and Seth Meyers' show still is the head writer there. Shout out Alex Bays. David Spade was in a throw off of one of ours because he was up in the ASU version. So I was really immersed in that, and I really loved that stuff. And then law school is law school. You can only goof around so much. And I came back to Las Vegas, and I was just trying to find my people because I was back in Vegas. Like, what am I doing here? Jeff, this is the one place of all the places that was like the one I don't want to go to. And now here I am.
Yeah.
And I just kind of stumbled into this little scene. I mean, it was the 90s. It was what we call the pre-Starbuckian coffee house revolution. And you couldn't, walk into you couldn't roll a pair of dice in Las Vegas without hitting the back end of a coffee shop. So there were tons. There was one over by UNLV that was particularly notorious, called the Cafe Espresso Roma, and they used to do poetry nights and comedy nights and music nights. At one point, when Jason Sudeikis and his girlfriend, then wife, now ex-wife, Kay Cannon, who wrote the Pitch Perfect series and stuff, they were performing over at the Flamingo as part of the Improv. So the Improv that's out of Illinois, out of Chicago, had these outlets all over, and they would do these shows, and they actually were, I think, four-walling it over at the Flamingo Hotel. And so after they would do their shows, they would come over to the Roma and just throw an hour-long free improv show, and the place would be packed. And that was the Killers did their first show there. I mean, this was like a cultural center. And you go down a few notches, maybe a few more after that, and you get to the poetry night. And I used to go up to the poetry night, and I would read all these crap-ass poems that I thought made fun of poetry and just goofed on pop culture. And that led to one day Lollapalooza launched out of Las Vegas, and it was at Sam Boyd Stadium that year. I can't remember. It was maybe 95, 96, somewhere around there. And they came to Cafe Roma to do like, they were, so there was all the bands that were playing on Lollapalooza that year. And it was, I think, the year after Cobain had committed suicide or whatever. So there was like this whole pallor over it. But anyway, they were doing traveling poets as part of the Lollapalooza experience. They had a poetry tent. All the traveling poets were all these, what was then a new form called slam poetry, God forbid that ever takes off. Oh God, it did. But they all performed at Roma, and then the local yokels got up and we all performed. And then we went out to Lollapalooza the next day because we all got free passes, and we performed in the poetry tent. And then I won the competition, and that earned me the right to open up on stage for the Breeders. If you remember the Breeders, they were kind of an offshoot of the Pixies. Well, the Breeders came and went, and I didn't go up. There was technical difficulties. I was just looming backstage waiting for my moment. And then they're like, oh, well, you're going to open up for George Clinton and Funkadelic. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. George Clinton and Funkadelic came and went, didn't go up. And the MC of the event is now, I think now he's like a big guy in the flower world, like putting flower designs and stuff like that together.
Okay.
But there's this guy named Mud Baron, and I'm telling this story, which I like to tell all the time. But anyway, he was dressed up in an old-timey preacher's outfit, and it was the middle of summer in Sam Boyd Stadium. There were 10,000 people just schwitzing their asses off, and there was barely enough water for everybody, and everybody was just glugging their bottles down as they could. And he comes out and he goes, and they boo him every time he come out. They're like, we hate you. And he's like, I hate you too. He goes, but I know what you really want. What you really want is your headliner. And they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we want. But, 10,000 people shouting that. And he goes, well, I've got your headliner. I've got the Beastie Boys coming out. But first, a poet. Spotlight comes on me. I'm just standing there. They go, you got 1 minute. And I'm kind of offset stage. And the best part of this whole story, other than that it was just a tragic trauma that I'll never get over. I have friends that were in the crowd with a video taping device. They had a video recorder, and you just hear them talking to each other. And the one turns to the other and he says, oh, Figler's going to get killed. Like, that's it. And you can't really hear the audio. You see the visual of literally 10,000 empty water bottles flying on the stage as I'm ducking and weaving, reading my poem about Henry Rollins and footballers. And I don't even remember what it was. And then, in the middle of the poem, I maybe made it 45 seconds of my minute. The stage manager came running out on the stage. And he was like, stop the show. The Beastie Boys equipment's getting wet. Like, he's like, no more poetry on this tour. No more poetry because of you. And I'm like, oh my God, I just ruined it for everybody. They whisk me backstage. I bump into one of the Beastie Boys. He's like, tough gig, man. And then they're like, oh God, they lock me in a trailer. About half hour goes by. I hear the little key on the door. A guy walks in. He goes, you're the poet, huh? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, don't worry. This was expected. And I'm like, oh, great. He goes, here. And he opens up the drawer. And I thought he was going to pull out a gun and just shoot me. And he pulls out a check and he paid me $100. There you go. That's my Beastie Boys in Las Vegas Lollapalooza story. I hope you enjoyed that, Jeff.
That's outstanding. I love your friends. Figler's going to get killed.
Figler's going to get killed. Seriously. Doug Jablin, Tony Bondi. Figler's going to get killed. So that was it. That's the answer to your friggin' question. How did I get involved in all that stuff? It's like, man, the adrenaline from that, you're going to chase for the rest of your life. So I've got involved in storytelling and producing poetry events and music events. And around that same time, started up with some good friends, a goofy punk rock tuba band, which played last night for the first time in 3 years at a private party for no good reason. Yeah, that's you know what, you got to find your thing in Vegas. And my thing is like anything, like just bring it, like, anything that allows the mind to thrive outside of the misery of knowing where the fuck you're stuck. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to curse on here? I usually curse.
Absolutely,
I don't
yes.
hear a lot of cursing on your podcast. Um,
That's okay.
however I wound up in this godforsaken desert town with all the shenanigans that I both love and hate simultaneously, it's kind of kept me going, and I don't mind. And I love writing. I love writing about our city. I love celebrating it and criticizing it, hopefully in the same breath.
Well, you've done a lot of writing and a lot of storytelling. You mentioned, I mean, you've done a lot of stuff with the NPR, and you've been involved with Nevada Independent and things like that. I mean, again, I assume these are all just sort of offshoots of you wanting to continue that expansion of yourself and of your writing and your storytelling.
Well, yes. Short answer, yes. I mean, to me, it's always all part of the same adventure of like, look, your family brought you to Las Vegas. You obviously can't leave. It keeps pulling you back in. So you have some manner of duty to kind of like explain it, or at least like leave a roadmap for those in the future who come after you. And that has always been my motivation, to just kind of try to explain what the hell this is that we're doing here. This very peculiar experiment of which I feel part guinea pig, part scientist at the same time. And so, yeah, it's come to a lot of like commentary. I was doing a lot of stuff on All Things Consider for NPR, and just talking about sitting at a poker table with Jennifer Tilly, or like, why does everybody want to put their nuclear waste 90 minutes from the most glorious place on earth, or why we only have 10 minutes to get our spring cleaning done because it's going to be summer in exactly 9 minutes and 30 seconds, because that is our season. It's summer and not summer, right? So like
Yeah.
all the things that happen here, it's just so rife for, yeah, I'm gonna say the word examination, but also it's funny and weird and interesting, and maybe Jeff, it's important, which is why you and I both go on our podcast to talk about our damn cities. And that was the evolution, all those op-eds and short stories, fiction, nonfiction, little mini memoirs, whatever came up through the years of stuff I was writing about Las Vegas. And I literally 1,000 pieces I've written about Las Vegas, either performed or in magazines or anthologies or whatever, all led me to doing a daily podcast about my city and celebrating and examining, and sometimes talking shit about all the things that make the city what it is. And that's what CityCast Las Vegas became.
I want to talk about CityCast Las Vegas because this is a very interesting podcast to me. It's a daily podcast, which
Yes.
blows me away.
Me too.
Because I find I find doing a weekly podcast is exhausting at times. Doing a daily podcast has got to be just, I mean, I can't even imagine the challenges associated with trying to do this as a daily show.
Yeah, well, most of that is because there's just a stellar team working on it. I mean, this is a model that is in a couple of cities now, 11 actually across the country. CityCast as a podcast format is in Chicago, it's in Denver, Philly, Houston, Portland, lots of places. And the note about it is that every city itself is autonomous. It's all local people creating that daily show. We have producers. We have a newsletter that goes with it, which is remarkable. Anyone who is a longtime observer of Las Vegas will know the name Scott Dickensheets. He has been involved in most of the important publications in Las Vegas over the last few decades. He puts together a daily newsletter that has all the stories of the last 24-hour cycle, interviews with people, almanac-like facts about Las Vegas, obscure pictures, polls, reader comments, the whole thing. And he pulls that together every day. That's amazing. Our producers, Sonia Cho Swanson and Layla Muhammad, longtime Las Vegans. Layla was born and raised here. And we get together. We had a wondrous co-host named Vogue Robinson who was with us for a year, and she just recently left. But yeah, we put our heads together every day, but every week, and try to find, what are things that Las Vegas is talking about, like what's in the news, and what are some of the hidden gems, and what are the things that people think they know a lot about, but maybe don't. And so we've really been exploring as many different aspects. And one thing that we do whenever we have a guest on, at the end of the show, we kind of ask them some demographic questions. But one of my favorite one is, what neighborhood do you live in? We really want to not just be a show about downtown or a show just about the strip. I mean, we talk about gambling now and again. I can't get it out of my system, but it's not the thrust of it. A lot of podcasts, about Las Vegas now are about sports betting or gambling almost exclusively, and some are about the sports teams and whatnot. And we do touch on all those things, sure, but we talk a lot about food and a lot about local politics and a lot about just life in our city, but not just one part or the other, but as much as we can. And we really strive to have guests that just are from all sorts of different backgrounds. They have all sorts of different perspectives that literally live in different parts of the valley. And that's been so rewarding. And as much as I loved curating my storytelling series, this is a different type of love of just learning about a city that, I would very arrogantly say, I know everything there is to know about Las Vegas. Come on, I've lived here my whole life. And that curiosity I thought was dead, but it is alive again with CityCast. So yeah, every day, man. Not every episode's going to be a home run. I'm going to say that right now. We try for that consistency, but I will tell you this, there's going to be something interesting in almost every episode that we do. And they run short. They're like 20, 25 minutes, perfect for a commute or a workout or doing chores. And that's by design. And we don't mess with, anything except creating great content. That's what the local team here does. And we're proud of what we've been doing. And we've been daily weekdays since July of 2022. So we've got like almost 400 episodes, coming up on 400 episodes. So people can go to whatever format they listen to podcasts, because we're on all of them, or go to our homepage and subscribe to that newsletter. It's all free. We have limited advertising that comes onto the podcast, but I don't think it's too intrusive because it's a short show, and that's it. We really do try to be something special for Las Vegas. We got the best compliment I've heard about it, Jeff, is that somebody was like, I miss the old alternative weeklies that used to be all over Las Vegas. There's, the Las Vegas City Life and the New Times and Vegas 7, the old Scope magazine, different iterations of Las Vegas Weekly, which is the one that still remains. And there were some monthly magazines. A lot of those have gone by the wayside. In fact, most of them have. But the one thing that they did was just have this magazine approach to the interesting things that happen to happen in our city. And I like to think that we're kind of an audio version of that. And if you're going to be an audio magazine, you got to have a lot of articles. And so that's what we do every day. Every day is a new article. So that's CityCast. And it was enough for me that I have put a sabbatical on my law practice.
Oh, wow.
Mostly. I still,
Mostly.
look, sometimes I get calls. I will talk to people. If nothing else, hopefully I'll calm them down. And if it's not something that I can handle with my load with the podcast, then hopefully point them in a good direction. But it's actually allowed me a little bit of break from the not puppies and not rainbows law that I was practicing, for sure.
I think it's important though too, like, I mean, it's a podcast that's targeted at locals because it's a lot of local events and local happenings. But I think it's important for people that aren't necessarily locals to listen to and learn that there's more to Vegas than the Strip and downtown, because I think that's always kind of it's a mind-blowing thing for a lot of people when they go to Vegas. And I've went through this when I first started going to Las Vegas and started making a lot of friends that clearly don't live on the Strip or live downtown.
Right.
And I'd go to visit them, and you're driving through their neighborhood and it's like, well, there's an Applebee's at the corner, and there's an elementary school, and there's a playground. And What? No, these things don't exist in Las Vegas.
Right.
This is so weird.
All those 2.5 million people, they just work and live in casinos, right?
Right?
When you drive in, you're like, I don't know what that is. That like a movie set? What's
Exactly.
out? What's away from the Strip? What are all those little weird pools and things? Yeah, it is. Look, it's always been a tale of two cities here. It's the Strip City, and then there's the rest of Las Vegas proper, right? And Strip City outnumbers us. I mean, they're like 20-fold our population, and a lot of what we do serves them, and so it makes sense that it's always going to be a prominent part of the conversation. But like you said, Jeff, it's a city like any other city, and it has real live people who have real interesting adventures that have nothing to do with top restaurants on the Strip or gambling or being in awe of the Sphere.
Exactly. Dayvid, if people want to find, obviously they can find the podcast anywhere they get podcasts.
Yeah.
CityCast Las Vegas. Just search that out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
Yeah, or our launch page, which is lasvegas.citycast.fm. It's pretty easy, and all the links are there, and then all the links to all the people involved are there too. So whether I'm on social media, my moniker, Oi Vegas, as I like to say, or any of the other folks, whether it's Scott or Sonia or Layla involved, or Vogue Robinson, we have lots of links to everybody, so you could find all the different things that we're involved in. And we've all been involved in so many different things. I mean, that's the beauty of this podcast, is everyone brings this really interesting history to the table.
Excellent. Dayvid, thank you for taking the time and having the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun, Jeff. And thanks for continuing to be interested in ways that are thoughtful about our city. I really enjoy your podcast, and I'm really privileged to be a guest today. So thanks so much.
And that wraps up another episode of Jeff Does Vegas. If you've got feedback on this episode of the show, or any other episode for that matter, or you've got suggestions and ideas for topics you'd like me to cover on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to me via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Jeff Does Vegas. Or drop me an email directly at jeff@jeffdoesvegas.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for checking out the show. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll know the moment new episodes are available. And don't forget to visit jeffdoesvegas.com for past episodes and show notes. My name is Jeff, and this has been Jeff Does Vegas, a Walker New Media production.